After the class reunion, my wife wanted me to forgive her. At the university reunion, Mary slept with her first love, Leo. When the surveillance video arrived in my inbox at dawn, the hickey on her neck hadn't even faded. I destroyed the financial backbone of Leo's family and dragged him into an underground operating room. Like stealing things? Then you won't be needing that tool anymore. Mary knelt, begging me to spare him. I gripped her chin and smiled. What's the rush? You're next. When she lost control at the charity gala broadcasted live across the internet, with media spotlights zooming in on the filth beneath her skirt, I swirled my glass of red wine and asked my assistant, "Isn't her bastard father still on dialysis?" Chapter 1. George tossed the last signed document to his assistant as the clock struck midnight. His phone screen lit up abruptly in the dim study, buzzing, not a call, but an encrypted email. The sender was anonymous. The subject line, just a string of cold numbers, 202-31005. He leaned back into the plush leather chair, tapping the cool metal casing before finally unlocking it. The loading circle spun for a few seconds before a high-definition video window popped up. The footage was shaky, the lighting suggestive. The background was a hotel room, a messy bed, scattered clothes. The camera zoomed in, focusing on two entangled figures. The man was a familiar face. Leo. Mary's infamous college sweetheart, the one everyone knew about. The woman had her back to the camera, her pale spine glowing like fine jade in the dim light. She turned her head slightly, strands of hair clinging to her sweat-dampened cheek, letting out muffled, tearful moans. That face, George would recognize it even if it were burned to ashes. Mary, his wife, married for just 3 months. The video continued. Leo bent down, pressing his lips to Mary's slender neck, sucking hard. Mary arched her back, her fingers digging into the man's sweat-slicked skin like a drowning woman clinging to driftwood. The footage was deliberately shaky, the angle awkward, clearly from a well-hidden camera. The audio was amplified, gasps, collisions, slick sounds, mingled with incoherent whispers of love. Leo, Leo, Mary's voice was fragmented, carrying a kind of reckless abandon George had never heard before. Mary, my Mary, Leo responded, his movements growing rougher. George watched in silence. His face was expressionless, like cold, unyielding stone. Only his knuckles, gripping the phone, turned a terrifying shade of white, the faint crack of strained tendons piercing the dead quiet of the study. The video was long, an endless torture. He watched Leo's hands roam Mary's body, watched Mary coil around the man like ivy, watched the unfamiliar, intoxicated look of pure lust on her face. Finally, the screen went black with a sharp cry and a deep groan. The video ended. The study was left with only his heavy, suppressed breathing. Silence. The air felt like frozen lead, pressing down. He remained motionless, the screen's glow casting shadows over his sunken eyes, where a storm of darkness swirled, threatening to consume everything. A long time passed, so long that the night outside seemed to thicken, before he slowly lowered the phone. Picking up the intercom, he dialed a memorized extension. It rang once before the other end answered immediately, voice deferential. Mr. George. Investigate 2 people. George's voice was low and steady, betraying nothing, cold as Siberian permafrost. Mary's whereabouts tonight. Everyone she met. Leo, that young master of the Leo family pharmaceutical company. His entire family. All the businesses, connections, bank accounts, and shady dealings of the Leo family spanning 3 generations. I want everything on my desk before dawn. Yes, Mr. George. The response came without hesitation. The call ended. George stood up, his tall figure casting a heavy shadow against the floor-to-ceiling window. Outside, the city's glittering lights reflected off his cold, expressionless profile. He raised a hand, his thumb roughly brushing against the icy glass, as if trying to erase some filthy mark. At the corner of his mouth, a slow, deliberate smirk formed, devoid of warmth, brimming only with cruel amusement. Mary. He silently mouthed the name, tasting the metallic tang of blood on his tongue. The game has begun. Turning away from the study, he didn't head toward the master bedroom. Instead, he pushed open the door to the long vacant guest room at the end of the hallway. The door clicked shut behind him, sealing off any lingering trace of scent that might have remained in the master suite. Chapter 2. The morning sun pierced through the gaps of the expensive velvet curtains, casting a harsh strip of light across the carpet. Mary woke to her internal clock. Her head felt heavy, her temples throbbing. Propping herself up, the silk sheets slipped away, exposing her shoulders to the cool air, sending a faint shiver through her. A strange ache pulsed deep within her body, as if she'd been taken apart and reassembled. Last night, the class reunion. Her memories were like a fragmented tape, blurry, chaotic. The noisy private room, drink after drink pushed into her hands, Leo's concerned gaze. And then, she shook her head, trying to dispel the dizziness and unease. Blaming it on the hangover. Pushing the covers aside, she stepped onto the plush carpet barefoot and headed for the bathroom. The mirror reflected a face still beautiful despite its pallor, faint shadows under her eyes. She turned on the faucet, splashing cold water onto her face, willing herself to wake up fully. Drops of icy water trailed down her neck. Her gaze drifted absently back to her reflection, then froze. There, on the left side of her neck, near the collarbone, a vivid, unmistakable mark, stark against her pale skin, like a seal pressed there with malice. Mary's breath hitched. Instinctively, her fingers reached up, brushing the spot, a faint sting. Fragments of last night surged forward. Dim lighting, scorching breaths, searing lips against her neck, biting down with near-feral intensity. Leo. The name slipped from her lips, unbidden, laced with a tremor of horror. Her hand flew to her mouth, heart hammering violently, threatening to burst from her chest. All color drained from her face, leaving her paler than her nightgown. How? Her and Leo. Did something really happen last night? Panic seized her. Frantically, she tugged the neckline of her gown higher, fingers trembling as she tried to hide the damning mark. No, George couldn't see this. She practically lunged for the vanity, scrambling for concealer. A foundation bottle toppled, rolling soundlessly onto the thick carpet. Just then, the bedroom door opened. Mary went rigid, her blood turning to ice. Clutching the concealer tube, she stayed perfectly still, her back to the door. Footsteps approached, steady, deliberate. Stopping just a few paces behind her. The air filled with the scent of expensive aftershave and a faint trace of tobacco, George's presence pressing down on her like an invisible weight. Awake. His voice betrayed nothing. Calm, fathomless, like still black water. Mary took a deep breath, forcing herself to turn around, her face twisting into a stiff smile. Yeah, just woke up. Had a bit too much to drink at the class reunion last night. She tried to keep her voice steady, but the faintest tremor lingered at the end. Subconsciously, she tugged at the collar of her robe, her movements hurried. George's gaze settled on her face, deep, calm, like the still surface of an ancient well. His eyes flickered almost imperceptibly over her neck, lingering for the briefest moment on the deliberately pulled-up collar. There was no warmth in that look, yet it made Mary feel as if a cold blade had scraped across her skin, a chill shooting from her feet to the top of her head. She felt stripped bare, exposed in a frozen wasteland. Is that so? George responded flatly, his tone unreadable. He adjusted his cuffs with slow, deliberate movements, elegant and composed. Drink less next time. It's bad for you. With that, he turned away without another glance, heading toward the walk-in closet. Only when his figure disappeared behind the closet door did Mary slump against the edge of the cold vanity, her legs giving way as if drained of strength. Cold sweat soaked through her thin robe. She gasped for air, her heart still pounding wildly. Did he see it just now? That look. It was terrifying. Terrifyingly calm. Shivering, she grabbed the concealer, her hands trembling as she frantically dabbed at the faint bruise in the mirror. The thick paste masked the mark, but it couldn't hide the icy dread spreading like wildfire in her chest. Inside the closet, George stood before a row of immaculately pressed suits, his fingers brushing against the lapel of a dark gray cashmere jacket. His face was expressionless, but his eyes were cold, like poisoned icicles. When Mary had pulled up her collar earlier, the slight gap had revealed a flash of lurid red, vanishing as quickly as it appeared. The exact same spot as in the screenshot from the video in his inbox. Chapter 3. George sat at the head of the breakfast table, effortlessly slicing into his fried egg. The light, rhythmic clink of silverware against porcelain echoed unnaturally loud in the silent dining room. Mary sat across from him, her untouched breakfast arranged meticulously before her. She kept her head down, sipping small mouthfuls of warm milk, using the rim of the cup to hide her pale face and darting eyes. The air was thick with the rich aroma of premium coffee beans and the faint scent of concealer clinging to her. George swallowed his last bite, dabbed his lips with a napkin, every motion precise. Plans for today? He lifted his gaze to Mary, his tone the same detached, unreadable inquiry as always. Mary's fingers tightened around her cup, her fingertips icy. This afternoon, I'm meeting Sophie at the art gallery for the new exhibition. She glanced at George quickly before dropping her eyes again, adding, You know, the friend I mentioned before. George lifted his bone china coffee cup, the steam obscuring his deep-set eyes. Sophie. He repeated the name slowly, his voice devoid of inflection. Didn't she accompany her mother to Switzerland for treatment last month? For her mother's rheumatism, needed the Alpine hot springs, if I recall. Clatter. Mary's milk cup slipped from her grasp, crashing onto the table. Warm liquid splashed across the expensive linen tablecloth, staining the front of her cream-colored loungewear. She jerked her hand back as if scalded, her face ghostly white, lips trembling wordlessly. The lie had been exposed like a slap to the face. Frantically, she grabbed napkins to blot the mess, her hands shaking so badly the paper crumpled into a soggy, useless wad. George watched her disheveled appearance quietly, his eyes devoid of surprise or anger, only an unfathomable indifference, as if observing a farce that had nothing to do with him. Is that so? Maybe I misremembered. He set down the coffee cup with a faint clink, his tone as casual, as if discussing the weather. Have fun this afternoon. He stood up, his tall figure exuding an intangible pressure. George. Mary suddenly looked up, her voice choked with tears and desperate pleading. George didn't pause, nor did he glance back at her. He strode straight to the living room, picked up the suit jacket draped over the arm of the sofa, and slipped it on with practiced ease. Adjusting his tie in the full-length mirror by the entryway, the reflection captured the scene behind him. Mary still frozen in place, her spirit shattered, the mess of spilled milk on her chest mirroring the ruins of her life. I have a business dinner tonight. Don't wait up. His voice from the foyer was calm, unruffled. The lock clicked softly. The heavy solid wood door sealed shut, severing the last fragile thread of Mary's dwindling hope. George settled into the back seat of the black Bentley waiting outside the porch. The door closed, shutting out the crisp air. The driver asked respectfully, Mr. George, to the office? George leaned back against the luxurious leather seat, his eyes closed. A trace of weariness flickered between his brows, but it was overshadowed by something colder, harder, and unyielding ruthlessness. The car fell silent, save for the low hum of the engine. Slowly, he opened his eyes and pulled out his phone. The screen lit up. His fingers swiped across it, opening an encrypted album containing only one photo, the most damning screenshot from last night's anonymous email. Mary's face was tilted upward, her gaze dazed, the dark red hickey on her neck unmistakable under the dim, suggestive lighting. Leo was buried against her neck, his posture intimate, possessive. George's thumb dragged heavily, deliberately across the screen, tracing Mary's intoxicated expression with enough force to nearly crack the glass. Deep in his eyes, the last flicker of something once called marital affection extinguished completely, leaving only an endless, icy void. He exited the album and dialed a number. Mr. George. The voice on the other end was as crisp and deferential as ever. Everything's ready. George's voice was low, devoid of warmth. Ready. 67% of the Leo family's pharmaceutical company's core raw material supply channels are controlled by 3 key middlemen. Our people have already negotiated with them. The contracts can be signed at any time. The Leo family's 2 largest overseas clients have also received more competitive offers and some internal materials regarding their product safety. Additionally, the evidence chain for Arthur Leo's past bribery and regulatory violations is complete. As for the man himself, Last night at the Stellaris Hotel, room 8088, the surveillance coverage was flawless. Good. The corner of George's lips curled into a cold, venomous smirk. Notify those 3 suppliers to sign the termination contracts at 3 p.m. today. Send formal emails to the overseas clients, informing them that the George Group can provide products of equal quality at 30% below the Leo family's price, and attach those internal materials. As for Arthur, he paused, his voice laced with ice. Find the right moment and deliver him to the right people. Understood. And Leo? Him? George's gaze drifted to the cityscape flashing past the car window, his eyes dark as an abyss. Let him have one more comfortable day. Tomorrow, bring him to me. Find a quiet place. Yes. The call ended. George tossed his phone onto the seat beside him and closed his eyes. The sunlight outside the car window fell on his face, casting sharp contrasts of light and shadow, yet it did nothing to soften the cold, rigid lines of his jaw. The car smoothly merged into the flow of traffic. A storm of destruction targeting the Leo family's pharmaceutical company, and Leo himself had silently begun on this seemingly peaceful morning. And at the center of the storm, the woman trembling in her gilded cage. Her nightmare was only just beginning. Chapter 4: The headquarters of the Leo Family Pharmaceuticals, top floor CEO's office. The afternoon sun streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows should have brought warmth, but instead, it only made Arthur feel waves of cold. He irritably loosened his tie, beads of sweat forming on his forehead as he nearly shouted into the phone, "Mr. Wong, we've been partners for years. We can negotiate the price. You can't just cut us off like this. Hello? Hello?" The only response was the icy drone of a dial tone. He slammed the receiver onto the expensive mahogany desk with a loud bang. This was already the 3rd core supplier to announce termination of their partnership this morning. As if they had coordinated it, their attitudes unyielding, leaving no room for negotiation. "Dad, what's going on?" The office door burst open as Leo rushed in, his hair disheveled, clearly stunned by the sudden bad news. Arthur's face was livid as he pointed at the still buzzing phone. "It's over. All of it. Our 3 most critical suppliers, gone. Without raw materials, the production lines are just scrap metal. The stock in our warehouses won't last 3 days." Leo's face paled. "How could this happen? Everything was fine yesterday. Is someone sabotaging us?" "Do you even need to ask?" Arthur panted like a trapped beast, pacing the office. "Someone's trying to destroy us. Find out. Find out who's stabbing us in the back." No sooner had he spoken than the intercom on the desk rang urgently, like a death knell. Arthur snatched it up. "What now?" "Mr. Arthur. It's terrible." The secretary's voice trembled with panic. "We just received urgent emails from Norson in Europe and Baikong in North America. They've unilaterally terminated all orders. They're claiming our products have major safety hazards and attached a test report. They're demanding massive compensation." "What?" Arthur's vision darkened, and he swayed, barely catching himself on the desk to keep from collapsing. Norson and Baikong were their 2 largest overseas clients, accounting for nearly 40% of the company's export revenue. This was a fatal blow. A test report? What test report? What safety hazards? Leo, now frantic, grabbed the phone and yelled. The email included, It's from last year's batch that was rejected by the Drug Administration. They claim it contained traces of banned substances." The secretary's voice shook uncontrollably. Arthur and Leo turned deathly pale. Last year's batch had indeed been flagged for a minor production error, but they had spent a fortune and pulled every string to suppress it, erasing all traces. How had that report ended up in their client's hands? Impossible. That report was destroyed. Arthur cried out, a chill shooting from his feet to the top of his head. He realized, whoever was behind this wasn't just ruthless, they knew everything about their secrets. This is far from just a business competition. It's a meticulously planned, deadly strike aimed at destroying them. The office door swung open again, and this time, the CFO walked in, clutching a few documents in his hand. His face was ashen, his lips trembling. "Mr. Arthur, Mr. Leo, the bank has, what now?" Leo was on the verge of losing it. "Our loans, they're demanding immediate full repayment." Several other partner banks have also sent notices freezing our credit lines. The CFO's voice was laced with despair. The cash flow, it's completely cut off. A bolt from the blue. Arthur could no longer hold himself together. His legs gave way, and he collapsed heavily into his executive chair. The very symbol of his power and status, staring blankly at the opulent crystal chandelier overhead. In just half a day, the mighty Leo family pharmaceuticals had crumbled like a skyscraper stripped of all its load-bearing walls, collapsing in a silent roar. Raw materials cut off, clients fleeing, funds frozen, damning scandals exposed. Each move was flawlessly executed, each strike fatal. The enemy had precisely seized every lifeline of the Leo family. Who is behind this? Who wants to destroy us? Arthur muttered hoarsely, his voice thick with resentment and terror. Leo stood frozen, watching his father's face age decades in an instant, taking in the chaos and despair that filled the office. A deep, icy dread gripped him. His mind was a whirlwind, suppliers cutting ties, clients breaking contracts, banks calling in debts, each word like a boulder crashing down. Yet, beneath the chaos and fear, an even more horrifying thought clawed its way to the surface. Mary. That wild night, in the hotel room, the hidden camera. He remembered a faint red flicker in the darkness, but in the heat of the moment, he dismissed it. Could it be? A chill shot through his entire body. If it really was George. Leo didn't dare finish the thought. With trembling fingers, he yanked out his phone, swiped open the screen, and frantically dialed Mary's number. Sorry, the subscriber you dialed cannot be reached for the moment. The cold, mechanical female voice from the receiver felt like a bucket of ice water poured over Leo's head. Refusing to give up, he dialed again. Once, twice. Only the monotonous, busy tone answered him. Mary had turned off her phone. This realization sent Leo's heart plummeting to the depths. Panic, like countless icy vines, instantly coiled around his heart, making it almost impossible to breathe. Unable to reach Mary, the company on the verge of collapse. All the ominous signs pointed to one name, George. Just then, the phone clenched in his hand vibrated abruptly, displaying an unfamiliar local number. Leo's heart lurched. Was this a lifeline, or the edge of a deeper trap? He took a deep breath, his fingers trembling as he swiped to answer, and pressed the phone tightly to his ear. Hello. His voice was hoarse and dry. A brief silence followed before a low, emotionless male voice, deliberately processed to sound metallic, spoke. Mr. Leo? Yes. Who is this? Leo demanded urgently. Mr. George wants to see you. The response was blunt, devoid of any unnecessary words. Leo's blood seemed to freeze in that instant. Mr. George. It was him after all. A wave of terror seized his throat, rendering him speechless. Regarding the predicament of the Leo family pharmaceuticals, the icy voice continued, devoid of inflection, yet cutting like a knife. Mr. George may be able to offer you a way out. Of course, the choice to meet or not is yours. Location, the abandoned Hongfa Machinery Factory in the Southern District, Warehouse Number 3. Time, 10 p.m. tonight. No waiting past the hour. Wait. Leo tried to speak, but the line had already gone dead. Dazed, he lowered the phone, his palms slick with cold sweat. His heart pounded violently in his chest, as if trying to shatter his ribs. George wanted to meet him, in that abandoned, godforsaken machinery factory warehouse. A way out? This was nothing but a wolf offering kindness to a lamb. A trap. A cold, naked, deathly trap. He wanted to run. Now. Immediately. As far away as possible. The urge was overwhelming. But Arthur's hollow, desperate gaze, the stench of bankruptcy permeating the office, the bank's ruthless debt notices. They were like heavy shackles around his neck. If the Leo family fell, so would he. From a profligate rich heir to a penniless nobody, possibly even burdened with crushing debt. That life would be worse than death. Did he even have a choice? Leo collapsed onto the sofa, his hands buried deep in his hair as he tugged in agony. Fear and a sick, desperate hope for survival tore at him. He thought of Mary's warm body, her breathless moans beneath him last night. Maybe George just wanted to humiliate him? Or, for Mary's sake, leave the Leo family a way out? After all, they were married. This absurd thought fragile as a straw, gave rise to a pitiful delusion in the abyss of his despair. Time ticked by, the sky outside darkening like his desolate mood. 9:40 p.m. A black Audi A6 glided silently to a stop in the shadows a few hundred meters from the gates of the Hongfa machinery factory. Leo sat alone in the driver's seat, his face ghostly pale in the dim light. His fingers, gripping the steering wheel, were white-knuckled, his body trembling uncontrollably. He gazed at the vast, abandoned factory district in the distance, crouching like a monstrous beast in the darkness. The rusted gates stood wide open, revealing a pitch-black interior punctuated only by sporadic green emergency exit lights flickering like ghostly flames. Warehouse number 3 lay deep within the complex, resembling a colossal, all-consuming tomb. Fear surged through him like icy tides, crashing against his nerves in relentless waves. He wanted to press the accelerator, turn around, and flee this cursed place. But the Leo family, his father's desperate gaze, and that pitiful, delusional sliver of hope for survival. With a sudden clench of his teeth, a glint of near-mad resolve flashed in his eyes. He pushed open the car door, and the frigid night wind instantly rushed in, sending a shiver down his spine. Tightening his coat around him, he trudged forward like a condemned prisoner walking to the gallows. Step by step, deeper into the factory's heart, where the stench of rust and decaying machine oil hung thick in the air. His footsteps echoed through the desolate, lifeless complex, sharp and solitary. Each heartbeat pounded heavily against his eardrums. Finally, he saw it, the massive warehouse door, its faded 3, barely legible. It stood slightly ajar, a dim, yellowish glow seeping through the gap. Leo's heart threatened to leap out of his throat. He stopped at the entrance, gasping for air, trying to steady his frantic pulse. His fingers, icy cold, brushed against the equally frigid, rough surface of the iron door. Creak. The heavy door slowly yielded to his push, opening just enough to unleash a thick, oppressive odor, dust, rust, and something chemical that assaulted his senses. Inside, the warehouse was eerily vast, its high ceiling swallowed by darkness. Only a small central area was illuminated by a few low-wattage incandescent bulbs hanging overhead. Their dim, flickering light cast twisted, wavering shadows on the ground. Beneath the glow stood a cold, stainless steel operating table, the kind found in hospitals. Beside it were several metal carts, their surfaces gleaming with a sterile sheen, draped in white surgical cloths that concealed ominous, indistinct shapes beneath. The macabre, operating room-like setup sent every hair on Leo's body standing on end. A chill shot up his spine, freezing him to the core. This wasn't a place for negotiation. This was an execution ground. He spun around to flee. "Mr. Leo, now that you're here, why leave in such a hurry?" A voice, cold, flat, and ghostly, spoke behind him. Leo whirled around in horror. From the depths of the warehouse, where the shadows were thickest, a tall figure emerged. Dressed in a sharply tailored black suit, he seemed to meld seamlessly with the darkness. The dim light grudgingly outlined his hard jawline and thin, tightly pressed lips. George. He stood there, silent, his gaze like twin blades forged from ice, piercing through the gloom, pinning Leo in place. There was no anger in those eyes, no mockery, only a fathomless, soul-numbing intent to kill. Leo felt his limbs lock up, his blood turning to ice. His mouth opened, but all that escaped was a hoarse, wheezing gasp, as though an invisible hand had seized his throat. "George, George." He finally forced out the words, his voice ragged and trembling beyond control. What do you want?" George didn't answer. His expression didn't shift, not even slightly. With an elegant, merciless tilt of his chin, he signaled. From the shadows, 2 more men in black suits materialized, expressionless, powerfully built, moving like wraiths. In an instant, they seized Leo's arms, their grips like iron clamps. "Let me go? What are you doing?" "George, you're insane. Let me go." Leo let out a desperate roar, thrashing wildly. But the combined strength of the 2 burly men was far beyond his resistance. His struggles were as futile as an ant trying to shake a tree, easily overpowered as he was dragged stumbling toward the cold stainless steel table. His leather shoes scraped against the dusty concrete floor, emitting a piercing screech that mingled with his terrified screams, echoing hauntingly through the desolate warehouse, agonizing and hopeless. George merely watched coldly, like a deity gazing down upon the futile struggles of an insignificant insect. The corners of his lips curled ever so slowly into a chilling, bone-deep smirk. "Let me go? George, you lunatic. Devil, release me." Leo's howls reverberated through the empty warehouse, filled with desperate intensity, yet met only with dead silence. His struggles were laughably feeble against the iron grip of the two men, his body roughly hauled toward the cold stainless steel operating table. The surface reflected the harsh white light, stinging his eyes. "Pin him down." George's voice finally cut through the silence. Not loud, but carrying an undeniable, soul-freezing authority. The two bodyguards acted without hesitation, their movements practiced and merciless. One slammed Leo's wildly twisting shoulders down, while the other seized his ankles, forcing him flat onto the icy metal surface. The moment his body made contact with the freezing metal, Leo let out a sharp cry. The cold seeped instantly through his thin clothes, piercing straight to his bones. But what terrified him even more was the way his limbs were forcibly spread apart and locked into the preset metal restraints at the edges of the table. Asterisk click, click, click. Asterisk. The crisp sound of the locks snapping shut was like the verdict of death itself. Leo's wrists and ankles were now firmly secured, his body stretched into a spread eagle position, utterly immobilized on this frigid torture bed. He writhed like a fish nailed to a chopping block, reduced to nothing but futile thrashing and desperate screams. "George, what the hell are you doing? Murder is illegal. Let me go." His eyes bulged, bloodshot veins spiderwebbing across his sclera as he strained to lift his head, staring at the shadowy figure standing at the edge of the light, a demonic silhouette. George strode forward unhurriedly, the sharp, cold echo of his dress shoes against the concrete floor punctuating the silence. He stopped beside the table, looking down at Leo's twisted, panic-stricken face with terrifying calm. "Illegal?" His thin lips parted, voice low and laced with mocking amusement. "Young Master Leo, when you were having your fun in someone else's wife's bed, did you ever think about what was illegal?" Leo's pupils contracted violently, the last trace of color draining from his face. His final shred of hope was utterly crushed. George knew. That hidden camera, that video, it was all him. I was wrong. Mr. George. Brother George. Spare me. I was drunk. It was Mary. She seduced me." Overwhelmed by sheer terror, Leo babbled incoherently, tears and snot streaming down his face as he shifted all blame onto Mary, desperately grasping at any last straw. George's gaze turned glacial, as if an abyss of eternal ice had suddenly erupted. He leaned down abruptly, seizing Leo's sweat-drenched hair and forcing his head up to meet those bone-chilling eyes. "Her debt will be settled in due time." George's voice was barely above a whisper, each word like shards of ice forced through clenched teeth. "But as for you, Leo, you love stealing, don't you?" His gaze, like a tangible ice pick, slowly descended with a chilling scrutiny, finally settling on Leo's restrained lower body. That gaze brimmed with the most primal, icy malice and a desire to strip away. Leo instantly understood George's intent. A surge of cold froze his blood, shooting straight to the crown of his head. Unprecedented, overwhelming terror seized his muscles, twisting them into spasms as he let out an inhuman scream. "No, don't. George, you can't do this. Please. I was wrong. I was really wrong. Just kill me. Kill me." His struggles reached an unprecedented frenzy, his body writhing wildly as he tried to break free from the cold restraints. The chains clattered violently, his wrists and ankles instantly rubbed raw, blood seeping out and staining the icy metal clasps. But it was all futile. George released his grip on Leo's hair and straightened up, his eyes returning to that icy indifference. He looked at Leo as though he were mere garbage awaiting disposal. He tilted his head slightly to the side. A man in a white doctor's coat, wearing a mask and cap, emerged silently from the shadows. His hands were clad in sterile gloves, his eyes dull and devoid of any emotion. He walked to the instrument cart and lifted the white cloth covering it. Under the light, rows of neatly arranged surgical instruments gleamed with a cold metallic sheen. Scalpels, scissors, forceps, and a few peculiarly shaped metal tools that sent chills down the spine at first glance. The white-coated doctor picked up a metal syringe and expertly drew a small amount of colorless, transparent liquid. Then, holding the syringe, he stepped toward Leo, who was pinned to the operating table like a sacrificial lamb. "No. Stay away. Get back. Get back." Leo completely broke down, screaming hysterically, his eyes bulging with sheer terror, his voice hoarse and torn, filled with primal despair and pleading. Urine gushed uncontrollably, soaking his pants and dripping down the cold table, emitting a foul stench. The white-coated doctor ignored his pleas, his expression unchanging. He moved to Leo's side with precise, merciless efficiency. One hand pressed down hard on Leo's thigh, muscles taut from violent struggle, while the other drove the gleaming needle down without hesitation. The cold needle pierced skin and muscle, delivering a sharp sting. "Gah!" Leo's scream cut off abruptly, morphing into a choked, guttural groan of pain. His body convulsed violently once before going limp, as if all his bones had been removed. Only his chest heaved rapidly, his eyes wide with terror and despair as he stared at the white-coated doctor. Anesthetic. A potent nerve blocker. The icy sensation spread rapidly from the injection site. Leo realized in horror that his lower body was losing sensation at an alarming rate. Heavy, numb, cold, as if it no longer belonged to him. No. He could only manage a weak, breathless whimper, tears and snot smeared across his face, his eyes filled with boundless fear and pleading as he stared at the cold figure standing at the edge of the light. "George. Mr. George, please. I beg you." George watched expressionlessly, watched as Leo's pants were stripped away, revealing his numb lower body, watched as the white-coated doctor picked up a strange, gleaming metal dilator and began working with clinical detachment. No words. No hesitation. Then came another instrument, longer, sharper, curved and serrated like a torture device, glinting menacingly under the light. The white-coated doctor raised it. Leo's pupils dilated to their limit, reflecting the cold, merciless gleam of impending annihilation. He wanted to scream, but his throat seemed blocked, leaving only desperate, guttural gasps, like a dying beast. The next second, asterisk thud. Asterisk a dull, grating sound of severing flesh, accompanied by the faint splatter of liquid, erupted abruptly in the silent warehouse. A scream, surpassing human limits in its sheer agony, tore from the depths of Leo's throat, so harrowing it could rend the soul. His entire body convulsed violently, arching upward as if electrocuted, only to be yanked back by the icy chains. His eyes bulged, veins bursting, nearly rupturing from their sockets. His facial muscles twisted grotesquely under unbearable pain, contorting into something demonic. Blood, copious, warm blood, gushed like a fountain from the violently severed area between his legs, instantly staining the cold stainless steel table. It dripped over the edges, pooling rapidly on the dusty concrete floor into an expanding, lurid crimson lake. The thick, nauseating stench of blood flooded the frigid air. Leo's body continued to jerk violently, each spasm squeezing out more blood. The heart-rending scream lasted mere seconds before weakening into intermittent, deathly moans. His gaze grew vacant, pupils dilating, leaving only boundless suffering and the ashen pallor of death. George stood motionless. The edges of his black suit seemed tinged with an imperceptible dark red under the dim yellow light. The overwhelming metallic scent of blood filled his nostrils, warm, cloying, carrying the fading essence of life. He watched the convulsing body on the table, its vitality draining away. He watched the spreading pool of blood. He watched the small, mangled lump of flesh discarded carelessly in the gore. Slowly, deeply he inhaled. The heavy stench flooded his lungs, strangely, thrillingly sweet. Then he closed his eyes. When they reopened, the storm and fury in those fathomless black depths had settled, replaced by something pure, icy, like a beast licking its claws after a feast. Satisfaction, a destructive, soul-deep ecstasy that crushed everything in its path. The cold curve of his lips, no longer concealed, lifted slowly, unmistakably, like a fissure in the abyss, revealing its monstrous fangs. Chapter 7 Junyi Club, top floor VIP suite, heavy curtains blocked all outside light. Only a dim floor lamp illuminated the room, casting faint outlines of expensive furniture. The air reeked of stale smoke, alcohol, and the cloying sweetness of some decadent perfume. Mary curled into a corner of the oversized sofa like a terrified animal. Her phone, long dead, lay discarded in another corner. She dared not turn it on, dared not contact anyone, especially George. The news of Leo's disappearance and the complete ruin of the Leo family spread like plague through their circles, each word lashing her frayed nerves. She knew. George had done this. He had seen the hickey. He knew everything. Cold tendrils of terror coiled around her, tightening relentlessly. She had no idea what awaited her, and the torment of the unknown was more unbearable than any direct punishment. 3 days had passed. George hadn't come home, hadn't called, hadn't given any sign of life. This deliberate, icy indifference was more excruciating than any torture. Just as she felt she was on the verge of being driven mad by the overwhelming fear, the heavy door swung open. A sliver of bright hallway light spilled in, outlining a tall, familiar figure. George stepped inside. Dressed in an impeccably tailored dark gray suit, he was immaculate, carrying the chill of the outdoors with him, his face devoid of any expression. He didn't spare a glance at Mary, who was curled up on the sofa, and instead walked straight to the liquor cabinet, pouring himself a glass of whiskey. The clink of ice against glass rang out sharply. Mary's heart leaped into her throat, her body trembling uncontrollably. Summoning every ounce of courage, she scrambled off the sofa, nearly crawling on all fours before stumbling to his feet. George, George. Her voice was so shaky it barely held together, thick with tears as she desperately clutched the hem of his cold trousers. I know I was wrong. I really do. Please forgive me this once. Just this once. I'll listen to you from now on, I swear. Please, please, for the sake of our marriage. George looked down at the woman weeping pitifully at his feet. She had dressed up carefully, but her makeup was ruined by tears, her hair disheveled, her eyes filled with terror and desperate pleading. That fragile, pitiable demeanor might have once stirred a flicker of sympathy in him. Now, it only filled him with disgust. He swirled the amber liquid in his glass, the ice clinking softly. His voice was eerily calm, even carrying a strange gentleness. Get up. The floor's cold. The unnatural softness made Mary's stomach drop. Instead of comfort, it sent a deeper chill through her. She didn't dare disobey, trembling as she used the nearby side table to pull herself up, her body still shaking violently. George took a sip of his drink, his gaze lingering on her pale face as if appraising an object. Leo, he said slowly, his tone as casual as if discussing the weather, is finished. Mary's head snapped up, her pupils dilating, all color draining from her face. Finished? What do you mean? Instead of answering directly, George watched the mix of horror and disbelief. And, faintly, concern, flashing in her eyes, his lips curling into a cold smirk. Exactly what it sounds like. That little tool of his for sneaking around. Useless now. He'll be pissing sitting down for the rest of his life. His voice was quiet, but each word was like a poisoned needle driving deep into her ears. A deafening roar exploded in Mary's mind. Finished, tool, pissing sitting down. Those cold, detached words pieced together a horrifying image that froze her soul. It was George. He had done it. He'd cut off. Guh. A wave of nausea and overwhelming terror seized her. She clapped a hand over her mouth, her stomach churning violently as she dry heaved, her legs buckling beneath her. What? Does it hurt you to hear that? George's voice turned icy, laced with venom. No, no. Mary shook her head frantically, tears streaming down her face. I have nothing to do with him anymore. George, believe me. That night, That night I was drunk. He forced me. It was him. I fought back. I really did. She stammered incoherently, trying to distance herself and shift all the blame onto the man who was already completely ruined. George watched her performance in silence, his gaze growing colder, like an unfathomable icy abyss. Only when she was crying so hard she could barely breathe did he finally speak, his voice low but carrying an undeniable authority. "You want me to spare the Leo family?" Mary's sobs cut off abruptly, as if her throat had been squeezed shut. She looked up, her swollen eyes flickering with a faint, drowning man grasping at straws hope. She nodded frantically, clinging to this last lifeline. "George, as long as you can calm your anger, I'll do anything." George set down his glass with a soft clink. He walked over to Mary, his tall frame casting a shadow that completely enveloped her. He reached out, his icy fingertips rough with calluses, and gripped her chin with brutal force, forcing her to meet his utterly frigid gaze. "Tomorrow night, at the Starlight Charity Gala," he said, staring into her tear-filled, terrified eyes, enunciating each word with slow, deliberate clarity, like the whisper of a demon. "I want you to publicly announce, in your own name, that you are donating 51% of your shares in Evening Star Culture, free of charge, to establish a special relief fund for male dysfunction patients." Boom! Mary felt as if a thunderbolt had exploded in her head, shattering her soul. The Starlight Charity Gala, that was the most elite social event in the city, attended by all the high society and swarmed by media. In her name, donating the controlling stake of the company she treated as her lifeline, and establishing a fund specifically for male dysfunction? This was 100 times crueler than stripping her naked in public. This was nailing her to the pillory, turning her into the biggest laughingstock of high society. Ensuring her name, Mary, would forever be tied to Leo's dysfunction and her own scandalous affair, making her the most disgraceful gossip topic at every dinner table. "No, George, you can't." Mary's eyes widened in horror, shaking her head wildly as tears poured down her face. "Don't do this to me. Please. The company is my life's work. You can't." George's fingers tightened abruptly around her chin, the force so great it felt like he might crush her bones. The pain robbed Mary of her voice, leaving only a choked whimper. His gaze was sharp as a blade, his voice icy and laced with annihilation. "Mary, you have two choices. Do as I say, and the Leo family might still cling to life. Or," he leaned in slightly, his lips nearly brushing her ear, his breath cold and reeking of whiskey and lethal intent, "you can try refusing. See if Leo's half-dead body can survive tomorrow. And that father of yours, the one hiding in the nursing home, clinging to life on a dialysis machine." That final sentence was the last straw, the most precise poison arrow, piercing through Mary's last defenses in an instant. Her father, the one she had desperately hidden for years, the gravely ill man surviving on dialysis. George had even uncovered that, and was now using him to threaten her. Mary's body went rigid, all her struggles, pleas, and terror freezing in place. The last flicker of light in her eyes died, leaving only ashen despair and boundless cold. As if all her bones had been removed, she collapsed limply to her knees, her chin still locked in George's merciless grip. I'll do." Her voice was as faint as a mosquito's hum, carrying a numb resignation. "I'll do as you say." George released his grip. Mary slid to the carpet like a limp rag, weeping silently, her body trembling violently from overwhelming despair and terror. George looked down at her from his towering height, observing her complete collapse, her posture of utter submission. A fleeting glint of icy, cruel satisfaction, akin to the thrill of watching prey struggle in its death throes, flickered deep within his fathomless eyes. He turned, picked up his suit jacket from the couch, and strode out of the suite without another glance at the woman on the floor. The heavy door shut behind him with a dull thud, sealing away the suffocating silence of despair inside. Chapter 8. The Starlight Charity Night. The venue glittered like a spilled river of stars. The chandelier's crystal light refracted into countless diamond-like sparks, while the air carried the fragrance of top-tier champagne and the heady scent of expensive perfumes. Elegant figures mingled, glasses clinking. The city's most powerful and affluent elites were all in attendance, adorned in jewels, exchanging pleasant smiles. Impeccably dressed waiters wove through the crowd with silver trays, while the media section buzzed with relentless camera flashes, like unquenchable embers. Mary wore a Valentino haute couture gown in the latest season's nude pink, paired with the priceless diamond necklace and earrings George had specially selected for her. Her makeup was flawless, rendering her as perfect and as lifeless as a mannequin in a display window. Arm in arm with George, she appeared at the red carpet entrance of the venue. Instantly, every gaze, every lens, swiveled toward them like spotlights. Countless eyes, probing, curious, gleeful, or outright disdainful, pricked at her exposed skin like a swarm of needles. The catastrophic collapse of the Leo family's pharmaceutical empire was still fresh in memory, and the news of Leo's accidental critical injury had spread like wildfire, fueling all manner of lurid speculation. Now, her joint appearance with George was explosive in itself. Mary's body tensed instantly. Her fingers, looped around George's arm, turned icy and stiff, her nails digging into her palms until the sharp pain barely anchored her faltering, rehearsed smile. She could acutely sense the overpowering, frigid dominance radiating from the man beside her, an immovable iceberg, a merciless executioner. "Relax, Mrs. George," George murmured, his voice low and pleasant, audible only to her, though the words were glacial. "The show has only just begun." With effortless composure, he guided her through the crowd. Wherever they passed, the clamor seemed to hush slightly, countless eyes trailing them. George remained unflappable, even wearing a faint, amiable smile, occasionally nodding at acquaintances, his commanding presence dominating the room. Beside him, Mary moved like an exquisite yet hollow marionette, each step a tread on razor blades. Finally, the charity auction and donation segment arrived. The host's exuberant voice invited heavyweight guests to announce major philanthropic acts. "Next, let us welcome Mr. George, president of the George Group, and his wife, Ms. Mary, CEO of Evening Star Culture. Please give them a warm welcome." Thunderous applause surged like a tidal wave. Mary's heart pounded violently in her chest, threatening to burst through her throat. Her legs felt leaden, too heavy to lift. George's arm lightly supported her waist, the force not strong but carrying an undeniable dominance, almost coercively guiding her to the center of the dazzling stage. The blinding spotlight hit her face, making her dizzy. The sea of dark figures below, countless pairs of eyes, countless flashing lenses, converged into a suffocating ocean. George took the microphone with effortless grace. He first nodded slightly to the audience, his magnetic voice resonating through every corner of the venue. "Thank you all for being here. Charity is a noble endeavor to give back to society. Tonight, my wife, Mrs. Mary, and I would also like to contribute our modest efforts to this cause." His arm naturally wrapped around Mary's slender waist, the gesture intimate, as if they were a loving couple. Only Mary could feel that his hand was like a cold iron clamp, firmly holding her in place, silently conveying a threat. "My wife, Mrs. Mary." George turned his head slightly, his gaze tenderly resting on Mary's pallid face, as if looking at her with the deepest affection, yet his words pierced like daggers, "has always been deeply concerned about the physical and mental health of special groups." Special groups? Physical and mental health? The guests exchanged glances below, curiosity and gossip thick in the air. George paused, as if carefully choosing his words, then announced clearly and resoundingly, "Therefore, Mary has decided, in her personal capacity, to donate 51% of her shares in Twilight Star Culture Media Company, Limited, free of charge." The audience erupted in muffled gasps. Twilight Star Culture. That was the entertainment company Mary had founded herself, which had been thriving in recent years. 51% of the shares, equivalent to handing over control of the entire company. This was an astronomical gesture. Flashbulbs exploded in a frenzy as reporters eagerly recorded this explosive news. George's smile deepened, carrying a strange, chilling tenderness as he continued. The proceeds from the donated shares will be used to establish a dedicated fund aimed at long-term, sustained care and support for. He deliberately paused, sweeping his gaze over the breathless crowd below, then clearly uttered the words that left everyone stunned. Male patients suffering from sexual dysfunction due to accidents or illness. Boom! The entire venue plunged into deathly silence. You could hear a pin drop. Every face froze in shock, disbelief, and incredulity. Then came the instant eruption of barely suppressed whispers and muffled snickers. Sexual dysfunction? Did I hear that right? Oh my God. She's donating her company just to set up this kind of fund. Wait, is this related to Leo? Countless gazes, sharp as knives, instantly stabbed toward Mary at the center of the stage. Those eyes were filled with naked mockery, disdain, schadenfreude, and voyeuristic excitement. Mary's mind went blank. George's voice buzzed in her ears like a curse. Sexual dysfunction, male patients. The words burned like red-hot branding irons, searing her soul. The gazes from below, the undisguised ridicule, felt like countless icy hands stripping her bare and trampling her in the filthiest mud. She felt all the blood in her body rush to her head, only to drain away completely the next second. Overwhelming shame, terror, despair, drowned her like a tsunami. She wanted to flee. Now. Immediately. Escape this hell. Just as her body stiffened, trying to break free from George's grip, an overwhelming, utterly uncontrollable urge to urinate surged through her like a breached dam, instantly shattering all her willpower. She didn't even have time to react. A rush of warm liquid gushed uncontrollably from between her legs, soaking through the thin, exquisitely crafted nude-pink haute couture skirt without any resistance. The wetness spread rapidly, forming a stark, expanding dark stain under the spotlight. The warmth trickled down her smooth calves, dripping onto the polished stage floor with audible splashes. A faint, pungent odor began to permeate the silent venue, unmistakable under the gaze of countless shocked onlookers. Time seemed to freeze completely at that moment. All sound vanished. All movement ceased. Below the stage, countless faces twisted in disbelief, eyes widened to their limits, while cameras flashed relentlessly, capturing this historic moment, the dark stain beneath her skirt immortalized in countless frames. On stage, Mary stood like a wax figure under a spell, her face drained of color, her eyes hollow and unfocused, her body trembling violently. She could feel the sticky warmth trickling down her thighs, smell the nauseating stench, and hear the deafening silence after her heart's frantic pounding. The world before her crumbled into dust. Beside her, George reacted with seamless grace. The moment she lost control, he released his hold on her waist as if avoiding something filthy, even taking an elegant, imperceptible half-step back. He remained standing tall, his expression unreadable, as though the scandalous humiliation, enough to socially annihilate any woman, had nothing to do with him. Only in the briefest, unnoticed flicker did his deep eyes dart to the glaring mess on the floor, to Mary's utter devastation. A fleeting, icy satisfaction, akin to savoring the finest wine, flashed in the depths of his gaze. The feast of destruction had reached its climax. He stood atop the ruins, relishing the sweetness of vengeance. Chapter 9. The camera flashes descended like an uncontrollable downpour, mercilessly bombarding the broken woman at the center of the stage. Each burst of light was a searing blade, nailing her to the pillar of shame for public execution. The shutter clicks, the stifled gasps and mocking laughter from the audience pierced Mary's already numb nerves like countless needles. The dark, spreading stain, the trails of liquid snaking down her calves, the undeniable stench hanging thick in the dead air. It was the final straw. Mary swayed, her vision blackening as all sound and light faded away. Like a severed log, she collapsed forward, lifeless and rigid. Thud! The dull impact echoed sharply in the silent hall. She lay sprawled on the cold, glossy stage, right beside the mess of her own making. The expensive nude pink gown was ruined beyond repair, her meticulously styled hair disheveled, the diamond necklace digging into her cheek. Utterly disgraced, like discarded trash. The commotion below grew louder, gasps rising in waves. Some covered their mouths, others craned their necks, while reporters frenziedly clicked their shutters, capturing this even more shocking scene. Amid the chaos, George frowned slightly, as if repulsed by the tainted air. He made no move to help his unconscious wife. He didn't even spare her a glance. He simply spoke into the microphone, his voice still steady, laced with just the right amount of concern. "Apologies, everyone. My wife has suddenly taken ill." He cast a glance toward the side of the stage. Two black-suited, well-trained bodyguards swiftly ascended the stage, efficiently yet coldly hoisting the unconscious Mary from the floor like a piece of oversized trash, quickly dragging her away from the spotlight and into the shadows backstage. A scandal that had rocked the entire city ended with the female lead's complete collapse and unconsciousness. The atmosphere in the venue grew eerily tense. Awkwardness, shock, and hushed whispers permeated every corner. The host forced composure as they took the stage, attempting to steer the conversation elsewhere, but everyone's thoughts were clearly still fixated on the jaw-dropping spectacle that had just unfolded. George, however, acted as if nothing had happened. He descended the stage with ease, even accepting a glass of champagne from a waiter, nodding politely to a few familiar executives, a faint, composed smile on his face, as if everything had gone exactly as planned. "Mr. George, this?" A business partner of the George Group approached, unable to hide his astonishment and curiosity. George swirled the crystal glass in his hand, the amber liquid refracting a cold gleam under the dazzling lights. "A minor domestic matter. Apologies for the spectacle." His tone was indifferent, as if the devastating humiliation earlier had been nothing more than brushing dust off his sleeve. "Ms. Mary is unwell and requires rest. Regarding the subsequent donations for Evening Star Culture, my assistant will handle everything." With those words, he effortlessly erased Mary from her own company, from her own life. Evening Star Culture, the enterprise she had poured her heart and soul into, had become nothing more than a sacrificial offering in his hands, a tool to complete this ritual of humiliation. He said no more, giving a slight nod before gracefully making his way toward a quieter balcony at the edge of the venue. Outside the balcony, the city's glittering nightscape stretched out, its countless lights resembling a river of stars on Earth. The cool evening breeze carried away some of the lingering chaos from the event hall. His assistant appeared silently behind him like a shadow, standing at attention with hands clasped. George stood with his back to the bustling cityscape, his tall figure cutting a deep silhouette against the night. He took a sip of the chilled champagne, feeling the slightly bitter liquid slide down his throat, bringing with it a sobering coldness. "That bastard father of hers," he began, his voice low, like ice crystals forming in the frigid night air. "Is he still clinging to life in that private sanatorium in the West, hooked up to a dialysis machine?" The assistant stiffened slightly before replying respectfully. "Yes, Mr. George. Daniel, chronic kidney failure, end stage. Dialysis 3 times a week. The expenses have been covered by Ms. Mary." "No, Mary's personal account. The account has since been frozen." George let out a soft his tone unreadable. He swirled the liquid in his glass, watching the tiny bubbles rise and burst. "Notify the sanatorium." His voice was devoid of emotion as he delivered the final verdict. "Terminate all treatment starting tomorrow. Settle the bills. And escort him out." "Yes, Mr. George." The assistant responded without hesitation. A humble life, in George's words, had been casually decided upon. George fell silent for a moment. The clamor of the city beyond the balcony seemed distant, drowned out by the whispering wind. Slowly, he turned, his gaze drifting toward the vast sea of lights in the distance. Unbidden, images flashed through his mind, the high-definition videos in his inbox, Mary lost beneath Leo. In the underground warehouse, Leo was strapped to the cold surgical table, his agonizing, despair-filled screams piercing the air, the blinding spray of blood gushing forth. On the stage, the dark, expanding stain beneath Mary's skirt, unmistakable under the spotlight, her collapse into the filth, utterly broken, every sound, every image poured into his icy heart like the richest, most potent wine, igniting a raging inferno. It was pure, overwhelming, transcendent ecstasy. The ultimate satisfaction of crushing the betrayer into the mud, obliterating every shred of their dignity and hope. The pleasure was so intense, so overwhelming, flooding every corner of his soul with a thrill bordering on tremors. He drew in a slow breath of the cool night air and exhaled. The destructive flames in his chest did not wane. Instead, they burned fiercer, purer. The corners of his lips curled upward uncontrollably. No longer a cold sneer, no longer restrained amusement. This was a fully unleashed, cruel, satiated grin, like a predator licking its claws after a feast. Heh! A low laugh escaped from deep in his throat, metallic and resonant, dissolving into the night breeze. He raised his crystal glass in a silent toast, to the glittering steel jungle beneath his feet, his domain, to the stage where a flawless act of vengeance had just unfolded. The champagne slid down his throat, cold yet stoking an even fiercer blaze. The feast was over. Amid the ruins, only the victor's icy echo remained.